You're listening to BBC Radio Scotland. Now, anyone who had a blood transfusion before 1991 should be tested for hepatitis C. An inquiry into contaminated NHS blood supplies has said thousands of people were infected with hepatitis C and HIV through NHS blood products in the 70s and 80s. It's been described as the worst treatment disaster in NHS history. An inquiry under Lord Penrose presented its recommendations in Edinburgh a short time ago. The findings were presented by Maria McCann, who has been secretary to the inquiry since its inception.
The legacy of the period when viral transmission via blood and blood products was occurring continues to be severe for many people, whether due to ill health or the loss of a loved one. There is one respect in which the inquiry can recommend action to prevent suffering from being greater than necessary: the detection of those whose transfusion-transmitted infection is still undiagnosed. The inquiry therefore recommends that the Scottish Government takes all reasonable steps to offer a hepatitis C test to everyone in Scotland who had a blood transfusion before September 1991 and who has not been tested for hepatitis C.
Now, as Maria McCann gave her closing remarks, there was an angry reaction from some of those in the room.
Copies of the full report, DVD and executive summary are available just outside the auditorium. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Bill Wright. I'm from Haemophilia Scotland. We've got another story to tell here. I would ask you please to stay in your seats and hear what we have to say, because as I say, we have an alternative story. When I first saw this report, I felt that as well. However, I would ask you to please bear with us and show some solidarity, because this is by no means the end of a story. Please take your seats.
Well, I'm joined now by Eleanor Bradford, our health correspondent. She's in Edinburgh. Eleanor, just first of all, sum up what it was like watching this.
Well, you got a sense of it there. It was an explosive, very tense atmosphere in the auditorium of the National Museum of Scotland. Things really started to kick off, really, when the secretary to the inquiry started talking through Lord Penrose's comments regarding the suffering of clinical staff, which he said should not be forgotten in this whole disaster. Clinical staff who discovered that products that had been given to patients were actually contaminated with life-threatening conditions. It was at that stage that people started to get really angry. People standing up calling it a whitewash, saying that it was disgusting. Some people walked out, but as you heard at the end there, one of the campaigners who's been campaigning many years, Bill Wright, tried to calm people down and told them that, like them, he was angry when he first read the conclusions of this inquiry, but he thought there was room to salvage something from it.
Well, maybe we can have a look at that then. Why would they think it was a whitewash, and therefore what were the findings, and what did they feel has been missed out?
Well, on the one hand, I suppose the positives are that the inquiry has found that screening should have been introduced earlier for hepatitis C. There was a 16-month delay in introducing that screening, which has been criticised. It has found that collection from prisoners should have been stopped far sooner than it was. However, on the other hand, it says that the reason why many patients weren't told of their diagnosis, even though doctors knew they were infected, and therefore by not being told, many of them put their partners and families at risk. He said that was down to a paternalistic attitude which prevailed at the time, and which he obviously feels can't be criticised. He also, really one of the main findings was that he said in few respects there were matters which could have been handled differently, and that has really infuriated campaigners here who feel that there has been a cover-up over many, many years. Their medical notes going missing, things that have been denied which have subsequently found out to be true. They really feel were expecting more from this inquiry and have felt badly let down.
Where are we in terms of the victims? Is there legal recourse?
It may be difficult. Discussions are going on at the moment with their main legal representatives. The problem is this happened so long ago. Some people may have problems because of the length of time that has passed. I think what the solicitors are hoping to get out of this is a proper compensation scheme. The government has never admitted fault, and so there never has been a compensation scheme. People have been given payments. It's distributed by a variety of different trusts via Westminster. It was a system that was criticised earlier this year by an all-party House of Commons committee, which said that many of the victims of this disaster are still living in poverty. And what I think the lawyers here are hoping for is that that at least can now be addressed.
We heard there the angry victims, and they very much, I'm guessing, would want to keep this alive and try to get some kind of recompense. What about the Scottish Government? What's been their reaction to this report? Because they will have seen it.
Well, we're expecting more from the Scottish Government later this afternoon. We're expecting possibly an apology to be made, not just in Scotland, but also at Westminster. So really, we're sort of waiting for that. On the other hand, the SNP government can claim some credit for this because it was them who agreed to an inquiry in the first place, although having agreed to it, it then took a senior judge to criticise the delay in bringing it in before it actually was set up. And the inquiry has taken 6 years and cost £12 million, something else which was shouted out in the auditorium as a scandal.
I'm just looking at the last item of remit for the report, which was, in quotes, to identify any lessons and implications for the future and make recommendations. Where did we get to on that?
To be honest, I haven't seen any implications for the future, recommendations for the future. We were given very little time, to be honest, to digest this 1,800-page report. And one of the things that the victims are calling for, ironically, is a readable interpretation of all the evidence that's been gathered. So we wait to see what lessons are to be learned as far as this inquiry has concluded. I think the main headlines for the moment, which is a major development, everyone who has ever had a blood transfusion before 1991 is to be offered testing for hepatitis C. That's not only a big undertaking, but also it will drive home to people really the implications of this disaster and how, ordinary people, everyone possibly who's had a blood transfusion is potentially at risk. Having said that, I don't want to frighten people. The eventual numbers are still likely to be low.
Eleanor, thank you. Eleanor Bradford, our health correspondent. There'll be a lot more on this with Varry Stewart. News Drive here on BBC Radio Scotland at 4 o'clock. Now, the Prime Minister has apologised to the thousands of people infected with hepatitis C and HIV through NHS blood transfusions and blood products more than 30 years ago. It followed this morning's publication of the Penrose Inquiry findings. Health Secretary Shona Robertson's also apologised on behalf of the NHS and the Government of Scotland. She accepted the inquiry's single recommendation that steps should be taken to offer blood tests to anyone in Scotland who had a blood transfusion before 1991 and who has not already been tested for hepatitis C. But there was an angry response to the report from victims and relatives who'd gathered to see its publication after a 6-year wait, with shouts of whitewash after the conclusions were read out. Our reporter Joanne Macaulay in Edinburgh has been getting some reaction to those inquiry findings.
Well, many of the people affected by the contaminated blood products were at the press conference to hear the conclusions of this 6-year inquiry. The victims are living with hepatitis C and HIV, but many of them have already died. With me is Bruce Norval, who contracted hepatitis C because of haemophilia blood products. So, Bruce, what do you make of today's report?
Today's report is £12 million worth of nonsense. It doesn't match the evidence that was given to the inquiry. Frequently, when you read the report in full, the comments don't match the actual evidence that is in the report. It seems disjointed, broken, and nonsensical in significant places. It degrades the opinion of victims against the opinion of doctors, which seems strange because the doctors have a lot more to lose by a negative opinion from the report than the victims do.
What in particular has angered you about this?
The idea that a consultant can be consistently wrong against best evidence for at least a decade and still be a credible expert, I think is an obscene travesty of the word expert. They should have been treated as significantly tainted by that event, yet they have been given significant weight in their comments to the point where they have been able to disregard comments made from patients about not being told they were being infected by simply using hearsay comments about I told the patient this and I told the patient that. No evidence, no written proof, nothing to back up what they've been saying. They've been given credibility way beyond that they deserve.
Now, you've been living with hepatitis C for many years now. What sort of effect has it had on your life?
Hepatitis C has robbed me of the ability to maintain employment. I now have a condition called peripheral neuropathy, which means I can't feel anything but pain anymore. And I'm checked for cancer every 6 months. So it's a bit like sitting on the proverbial wall wondering which green bottle you are. It is a very difficult, hard existence, peaked by very regular events which could be the last thing in your life. It could be that last visit to the doctor, and you very much sense that as you watch people you grew up with die from this disaster.
Now, David Cameron has given an apology to the victims this lunchtime. Does that make it any better?
An apology does not accept responsibility. He needs to take a hold of the damage that's been done and act in a humane way towards victims. We have people who are living in poverty, who cannot heat themselves properly, who can't even in some cases clothe themselves effectively because of the lack of money in their households. We need to stop that now. An apology would mean far more if it was involved with realistic support and compensation for victims.
So clearly your campaign isn't over yet. What do you want to do now?
It's my hope that Nicola Sturgeon, for example, will have enough courage to allow her government tomorrow to make a proper announcement that means and will make a difference to victims and their families. That's where we need to start. Then we will chase the evidence down, and then we should maybe go to Westminster and start talking about a UK-wide inquiry into this, the most disgusting of all disasters ever perpetrated within the NHS, which has only just been compounded by today's report.
Bruce Norval, thank you very much indeed. So that's the 6-year inquiry published today, but those affected by the contaminated blood products say their fight continues.